if you weren't, you wouldn't be on this call. You wouldn't have banded together like you have in the face of the delay in the Founder Institute course to be able to keep something going because of the energy that was already created around it. And then finally, and maybe the biggest assumption of all of them, is that you're willing to listen to other people, to reality, to the market, and if need be, change your model, change your focus. Maybe not give up on your vision, but maybe pivot it just a little bit, because that's an important part of where market research may take you. So market research, why do we do that? Well, we do market research for a couple of reasons. I've listed a few here. There's probably some more. But it basically is going to set you up for success. It's going to help you validate your idea.
Kirk, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. Some of these guys are asking to increase your screen to 125%. I guess they're having a hard time viewing the screen. If you could put the view a little,
Got it.
They'll be able to see it a little better. Thank you.
Yep, can do. All right. Is that better? Okay. So it's going to help you substantiate your idea. You're going to give yourself a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you do your market research right and you listen to what it tells you. It's going to help you refine assumptions about your market, about who your customer is, about who your competition is, and about what it's going to take for you to succeed. It's going to help you refine your focus, define the focus that you need to get started and to keep going. Like I said before, it's going to help you minimize risk because it's better to throw in the towel early on than a year into it when you've created a lot of pain and agony because your expectations weren't being met. You spent a lot of money, you spent a lot of effort and time beating your head against the wall, and things don't pan out. So 3 basic questions. There's a lot of questions. You can find them online, you can Google it, but if you can answer these 3 questions honestly, then it means that you've gone through the process of looking at who your client is, what your business model is, how you're going to monetize your idea. So you've got to figure out who is my customer, client, what is my market, what is my sub-market, what is my niche, if that's what you want to use. Is that market, are those customers going to pay me for what I'm offering? And if they're going to pay me, why? Don't stop at, yes, they're going to pay me. Why are they going to pay you? That's a very valuable piece of information in terms of scaling your idea, in terms of developing your market research, and in terms of being able to pivot if the market shifts on you at some time during your effort. So in terms of defining your market at the big 50,000 foot level, there's basically 2 ways to go. You can serve a business need or you can serve a consumer need. And in some cases you might serve both. In a few businesses that works. So what does your customer look like? Is it, it's more than a teenager. Maybe it's a Chinese American teenager between the ages of 16 and 18 whose parents make between $80,000 and $100,000 a year who lives in the Southeast. That's kind of what I mean by defining your customer. That carries you into a niche or a sub-market of a larger market because, the more parameters you can put around who your ideal customer is, the better your ability to serve that market and create a working business. So in this case, small is big. Being able to ramp down the scope on who you're trying to appeal to is big in terms of what your business can do and be in terms of serving that market. You need to look at things like how big is the market. We'll talk about some ways to get to that in a few minutes. How big is the overall market? How big is the sub-market? Is it seasonal? What impacts buying decisions in the market? How much of that can I reasonably expect to capture from where I sit in wherever you're sitting, Tampa, Sarasota, Bradenton? And then who else is in that market space? Who's my competition? In some cases, what is your competition for what you're asking people to give up for your product? Time, energy, bandwidth. So when you start to look at your customer, there's a couple of different things to do. And the column that you see on the left is a fairly standard thing that people will talk to you about in terms of startup research and market research. You know, age, male, female, where do they live, what do they do, education, how much money they make. But if you look on the right-hand side, that's where you start to refine this a little bit more. What sort of personality does your ideal customer have? What sort of values do they have? Do they share values with you? Is that part of how your business is set up? Interests, hobbies, lifestyle. Are you targeting young 20-something professionals who play volleyball on the beach on the weekend? Are you targeting professionals that don't play volleyball because they work all the time because their goal is to move up that corporate ladder? So as you start to look at your customer, and I made a note earlier, so in John's case, if he's looking at this chef's choice for getting this giving a chef an option for where he can turn to get this high quality produce and supplies for his business. Are those chefs at corporate restaurants? Are they at chains? Are they at private restaurants? Are they at hotels? Especially with a startup, it's extremely important not to try to be too many things to too many people in the beginning, because that's a recipe for disaster over and over and over. You need to figure out what you can do well, who needs that, and then reach that market. So you start to drill down. If you Google some of these terms like total available market, that's going to give you the overall market size. So for example, what is the overall market size for portable USB flash drives in the United States or in Europe or South America or wherever your focus is? Is that segment, is it growing or shrinking? Are there enough USB flash drives? What are people using them for? Is there something that may be looking to replace those in the future? Is there something new coming along? Is there a problem that you're going to solve by getting into the market? Maybe you've got the replacement to the USB flash drive. But I'm kind of repeating myself in terms of drilling down and focusing on a unique niche of the market, but that's extremely important that you determine in as much detail as you can what your customer looks like. So how do you do that? Well, you know, initially when I started looking around, I kept finding slides that looked like this. So they list these big companies, and I don't know how much you know about some of these companies. These, for the most part, these companies have big answers to big questions. You can get custom answers, custom analytics from them, but it's at a pretty big price. A great deal of these, you know, think Redmond, Freeform, Gartner, ABI. They're focused in, although they call it the technology space, the majority of their focus is in IT space, telecom, software, those kind of things. It's a very big incestuous kind of relationship. Forrester bought Jupiter Research. Gartner bought Burton Group. The only one that really bills themselves as kind of a full service technology market research firm is Aberdeen Group. So there may be some use out there if you're looking to answer a big question about the overall market. You can often find reports that these guys have done that are available for free. I've used a few of them before. I used a couple from Gartner. I paid about $700 for those. So for a startup, a lot of times that's not going to be reasonable. So where I like to focus for market research is on these kind of tools. And my favorite is Google. But there are others, you know. NetVibes and Delicious will allow you to start gathering and sorting social media based on search parameters. Facebook and LinkedIn will allow you to look at the leadership team for your competition. Look at individuals or even companies. A lot of companies now have LinkedIn pages that may be in that space with you, that may be working against you. And if they're announcing a new product, it's going to be on their LinkedIn page. It's going to be on their Twitter feed. It's going to be on Facebook. SlideShare is an extremely good source of information. A lot of presentations are available for free on SlideShare. You can do quick searches on there. I've used them for government research that I've done. It will talk about often breakthroughs in technology that somebody is working on or that they presented to a potential client as they're trying to do, you know, business development or look for partners. They will often give away more information in some of these forums than you might normally think they would. But as I said, Google is my favorite. And Google is my favorite because you can do so much with the tools and the plugins that are easily available. Google has a you know, /trends, /scholar, /groups, books, news. I would encourage all of you to become familiar with what Google can provide in terms of a search tool. What some of there are plugins for Google that will let you aggregate social media. They will let you aggregate search results from magazines, news feeds, so that you can reach them at the end of the day and keep track of them without spending an inordinate amount of time doing individual searches. Google Scholar is a great source of papers on research. It's my go-to place because it's all in one place and it's easy, I suppose. Maybe I'm lazy, but I would encourage you to take the time not only to look at the Google offerings, but to learn how to enter search strings and search terms so that you get, instead of, you know, 7.8 million search results, you can narrow it down to a reasonable number and then search within search. Look at how they're organized based on the rankings of the pages, and after you use it for a while, you can quickly know that once I get past page 3 or 4 on this topic, I'm not going to find anything new, or it's not going to be current enough for my use. So Google is my tool, my go-to tool for market research. I was going to look at one. My notes aren't showing up, so that's all right. So when you're doing your market research, you know, there's about 4 relevant methods after you do some internet research, because at some point you need to start to talk to that customer that you've identified. And probably the most common one is surveys. Now, it used to be that if you wanted to do a survey, you got your clipboard and you staked out a place where your ideal customer would be easy to find. I just did one of these about 3 weeks ago. I was in DC. It was the day of the big snowstorm that didn't appear, so my flight had been canceled and I was waiting around the airport, and these 2 MBA students came up with their clipboard. They were testing a business idea, and their target market were professionals who travel a lot. So they had been to Union Station 2 days prior, and they were at Reagan National that day interviewing people because that's where they figured they were going to find their targets. So there are numerous online tools now today that you can use to develop surveys. SurveyMonkey is one of the most common ones that I have seen used here in the area. But a survey is only as good as two things. It's as good as the questions that you develop beforehand and the market or the size of the sample that you wind up with. So one of the things that you want to be very, very careful about when you're doing surveys is biasing your questions. I would encourage you to get somebody to help you write the questions, somebody that doesn't have a vested interest in your dream, because it's very easy for you to create a survey that will validate your dream based on the way that you structure questions, the way you ask the questions, and maybe even who you ask the questions of. So be very careful about structuring survey questions. In-person surveys are, they should be part of your process because you can get a lot of feedback from a SurveyMonkey survey or another online tool, but a face-to-face survey lets you gauge reaction. It lets you gauge the impact of what you're proposing on the person because you can watch facial expressions, and it allows you to maybe pursue a subset of questions based on the answers to your initial set of survey questions. You can use mail surveys still. Those are not as common as they used to be. The U.S. Postal Service would love for you all to each send out several thousand surveys a week for a few weeks, I'm sure. But when you look at what's available now online, probably not a cost-effective use of your time or your postage stamp money. Another survey tool that you can use is focus groups, but you're going to spend some money to do that. Maybe not a lot, but you're going to spend a little bit. You need to hire somebody who does focus groups for one thing. Focus groups provide you a little better opportunity for feedback. Most of them are done in a setting where they can be videotaped. A lot of these firms will try to do them in locations where you could watch and judge reactions through some sort of a two-way mirror. If you've seen the analysts that CNN uses, they have a guy on that, or they did several months ago, fairly often, who did polling for the Republican National Party. And if you watch the way he structured his focus groups, you know, fairly laid back, you want to encourage people to respond, and you want them to be honest. You want them to give you honest feedback. I don't think the Republicans appreciated some of the feedback that they got, but they got honest feedback. You can schedule personal interviews with individuals that you believe fit the profile of your current market. Those again allow the face-to-face, just like the two-way mirror, allows for an observation of the subject that gives you more feedback than you can get just from the survey. One of the shortfalls of surveys is it's very good at answering the question, what, but it's not very good at the why. Just the nature of the way surveys are. So you can work with real people in settings that will give you a little more feedback based on reactions, allow you to go down to a different level on those survey questions. And then what I've got up on the screen right now is an exercise that I like to tell people that they need to do. When you've done some market research and maybe you've refined your idea a little bit and you've determined what it is you're going to sell and who it is you think you're going to sell it to, you need to start to create a customer view. We already talked about all the things that go into identifying who that customer is, but what sort of things are going to impact their purchasing decision? So if in this little scenario that I use, I ask people to put yourself into a customer's shoes and pretend that you just spent an amount of money on this idea that you've got, service, product, whatever it is. Maybe you spent $500 and you're trying to justify that to a significant other, to a business partner. How would you do that? What would be your approach? How would you explain to them the value of the purchase? Approach a skeptic. Say it's something that your wife thinks was frivolous. Well, how are you going to convince her that you just spent $500 on something that is going to be useful to your family or to you or to her? And then after you do that and you think you may have figured it out, find a disinterested party and give the scenario to them and ask them the same kinds of questions. How would you explain the value? How would you quantify this purchase, this decision to purchase, to someone else? Help me work through that. Help me understand why you did it, why you think it was valuable enough for you to spend the money to do it. The final thing I touch on really quickly, there is a gal out, Linda Falkenstein, and I probably shouldn't say gal, that's probably a no-go today, but Linda Falkenstein has written a book about niche craft. And her approach is actually, she uses a 7-step process to tell you how to define a niche for your product. She talks about the customer viewpoint and developing that. I wasn't totally sold on the entire thing that she did in the book, but the framework that she provides in terms of these 7 steps is a really good way to approach market research. She talks about defining your market, talking to your client, determining who it is, figuring out how the client views the market space, how they view the value, and reassessing after you reach a certain point before you move to test marketing, or before you go down and use a 3D printer somewhere to create a tactile 3D model that you can put in people's hands and get feedback, or a prototype that you can put in some shops locally and get some feedback. There's an Air Force Lieutenant Colonel back in World War II who developed a concept that he called the ODA loop. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It's been used in business before. It's a very famous concept. He used it to train fighter pilots. And he basically trained them that they should focus all of their efforts in a dogfight on these 4 actions in a sequence that went observe, orient, decide, and act. And that's what you're going to do with your market research. You're going to observe. You're going to use the tools that we've talked about to look at the market, look at the client, look at the customer, look at who you think the customer is. You're going to orient your view based on that initial research. You're going to make a decision, and then you're going to act on it. But in terms of market research, I can't overemphasize the fact that you're going to repeat this cycle over and over throughout the process. And if you do it right, it will keep you from making mistakes. But like anything else, bad market research leads to bad decisions, especially for startup. So if you're interested, I have some calculations. I didn't want to throw a whole bunch of formulas up on the screen tonight about, how do you figure out what the total market value is? How do you look at growth in a market to determine, what the size of that market's going to be in 5 years, 10 years, based on current realities. I'll be happy to share any of that stuff with you. I'll be happy to share the slides, such as they are. But that's all I have. Be happy for you guys to ask some questions or to just share thoughts back and forth. So, Mike, I guess I'm back to you.
Good job, Kirk. Man, I actually learned a few things there. Good job. I'd love to see those slides on determining addressable market, and I like those kinds of things. So I'm sure these guys have lots of questions. Jesse has one right now, so I am going to unmute him. Jesse?
Hey, Kirk. Yep. Hey, a lot of the market research that you were talking about, not necessarily through Google, but when you're talking to potential customers, if you're not selling retail, but you're selling to companies, colleges, the enterprise, whatever you want to call it, a lot of these folks, in my opinion, don't want you to take up their time with a product that you might be selling them that doesn't exist yet. Any thoughts on how you do polling for big corporate buyers with bigger ticket items instead of talking to kind of retail mom and dad?
That's a good question, and you're right. It is very difficult for a lot of these people, even if you can find the right person to get them to talk to you. But I can tell you what I've seen work recently with two different companies. They hired an intern from local university who went in and approached it from the viewpoint of MBA student doing research. They probably didn't say, I'm doing research for this company I'm working for this week. But I'm doing some research around this product that might be useful to folks in your industry. Maybe it's, the public library system, or you name it. Can you help me understand what it is that you guys are looking for? Are your needs being met by your current things that are out there? I know that this company has a product that's fairly similar. What do you guys use today to do this, if you do it at all? The thing I've used in the past is to try to reach out through a LinkedIn network to find somebody, offer to take them to lunch, offer to buy them lunch. I'm struggling with this concept right now. I would really appreciate your insights as a professional in this business to help me better define where I'm going to go with this venture that I'm working on. Mike, have you seen anything work?
I can't add anything more than what you just said, which I think is excellent. Anybody else have any other questions for Kirk? Just ping me on the chat down here and I'll turn you on. Jeff's got one. Go ahead, Jeff. You're up, Jeff. Jeff, are you muted?
I should probably take it off mute first. So you had mentioned the I was. So you had mentioned the studies that were out there outside of Google from the firms that had done some extensive research. Mm-hmm. When you're trying to determine things like your market size, I'll be a little bit more specific. So I'm looking at the sports ticket industry market, and there's all sorts of statistics out there on the total market. But the specifics of it and how it's broken down, you really focused on, or you recommend really focusing on zeroing in and really developing that niche. At what point do you say, I'm going to, swallow the $350 or the $500 and make the purchase? Because after you make that purchase, now you're obligated to go through that 50-page report.
Right. There will be some, and it's not going to apply to everybody, but for some markets, for some products or services, there's going to be information that you won't be able to reach any other way. You can try, one of the things I didn't mention that's a really good source, and so I'll back up a sec, is to say trade industries, trade associations are also a good source of information. But even a lot of them will only release it to members, and a membership may cost you, $100 a year or something. I had a product idea for something, and I wanted to look at the size of the fly fishing market nationwide, U.S. I couldn't find anything more than anecdotal information without paying money for it, except that I have a buddy that owns a fly fishing shop, and so I was able to go to him and get it through his connections as he and I brainstorm around it. But, it's going to depend on your personal situation. To a lot of startups, $350 is a lot of money, especially if you're not to market yet or you're in the negative cash flow situation, which is common. The question that I always ask when I'm making those kind of decisions is, what is the benefit to me in terms of either giving me the answer to a question that I desperately need answered, or a piece of information that's going to help me refine a plan or a process for my business that's more apt to lead me down the path to success. And personal story, I spent 6 months, I bought a ticket to DC once a month to go and sit in a meeting with a bunch of guys who were sharing ideas that I was interested in. Ultimately, that was a good decision, but because I was unemployed at the time, to spend, sometimes I stayed overnight, so to spend $600 or $700 on a 2-day trip to DC once a month was not something that was popular on the home front.
Hey, John, I think you had a question.
A good answer or a crappy answer?
That was a good answer. John, I think you're self-muted. Can you hear okay? John, we can't hear you. You're self-muted. You're self-muted. We can't hear you, John. We can see you talking into your phone, though. You're self-muted. John, you're self-muted. I can't control that. Okay, when you figure out how to unmute, we'll let you talk. Who wants to go next? Sushi. Sushi, go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead.
What is your number one recommendation? What is your best technique besides Google to do some market research?
Face-to-face.
Face-to-face, okay.
Without a doubt. If I could only do one thing, it would be to get out on the street and talk to the people that I think are going to be my customers.
Okay, I didn't really hear that because my internet connection is horrible today. I don't know if you heard what I just said.
Yeah, I said that if I only could do one thing, it would definitely be the face-to-face, to get out and talk to people on the street who are my customers.
Okay. Well, what if you are not sure which market to go after? Like, I have an idea, but I'm not sure exactly, how to focus which market.
Okay, so you're saying you haven't decided yet who your customer is, right?
Sushi, can you hear? John, we can hear you now, by the way. Sushi, go ahead. All right, so Sushi he fell off there. Go ahead, John, we can hear you. John?
Hey, John, we can hear you now.
We can hear you.
Time out.
We can hear you and we can see you. Do you have a question? John. All right. Who else got a question? David Christensen does. Okay, David, I'm unmuting you. Go ahead, David.
Testing 1, 2.
Go ahead, David.
Hey,
You
David.
can hear me, right?
Yep.
Kirk, you mentioned these Google tools that you like to use, Google Trends, Google Scholar, Books, News, and I think one more, but I wasn't typing fast enough to capture it. But I was going to ask you, do you have a resource that you would recommend, maybe a resource or two that someone new to market research like me could like go to you know, gain a quick understanding of how actually to use these tools for, you know, primary market research?
You know, one of the best sources that I found for that actually was a briefing that was given out in California for Founder Institute that was on SlideShare. And I found that by doing a Google search for market research and all caps A&D presentation. And I've got a note here probably that tells me who did it.
If you guys should be able to.
He did a really good job of going through the Google stuff.
If you guys can see my screen, right? So on the startupbiz.com website, under best practices, market research and metrics, there's an outstanding video there, David, and also Sushi, you were asking about Mechanical Turk. It's by Dan Shapiro, and it's a great video on how to use SurveyMonkey and Mechanical Turk. Can you guys see my screen? David, can you see it?
Yeah, it's a little bit small, but can you copy and paste the URL into the chat window?
Coming over right now.
Great, thanks, and thanks for the answer, Kirk.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't mention Mechanical Turk, but it is a really good tool, very cheap tool to use to get people to help you with sort of mundane tasks or maybe tasks that aren't that interesting to you. It is really good.
I wanted to follow up on just a few things to reiterate some of the things that Kirk said, which, by the way, I thought was an excellent presentation, and ream the point home just based on some personal experience. So first, he said, be careful about how you structure your questions. And in the early days of my career, I was with CompuServe, and we were launching in Seattle, we were launching the Internet division, which was called Sprynet. And our goal was to get people connected to the Internet, obviously. And we had a product called Internet in a Box. And internally, certain managers at CompuServe were trying to convince the shareholders to invest in an online service similar to CompuServe, but for idiots. So CompuServe at the time was for professionals, and then you had AOL, which was basically for the consumer, and AOL was eating CompuServe's lunch, and so they decided, well, we'll just do a cartoon version of AOL, and that'll solve the problem. And they went out, and the lead managers had a survey structure that came back with glowing market research that the market just would die to have a product, a new online service that was more fun and easier to use than CompuServe, and they would prefer that over AOL. And CompuServe proceeded to spend $60 million on building and launching a new online service called WOW. So that's a bit of trivia for you. And it was a massive flop because of the way they structured the research questions. In other words, they wanted to come back with positive research because a couple of the execs wanted to make their careers, and then they were summarily run out of town. And on the other hand, we were the redheaded stepchildren in Seattle working on a very slim budget, and we launched Sprynet, which was a huge success. It became the second largest ISP in the country and got PC Magazine's Editor's Choice because we didn't make that same mistake about not surveying your customers properly. Another tip I'll give you, and it's on this web page here, one of the best things that you can do, and Kirk did a great job of alluding to it. Develop a customer and give the customer a name. So when we launched iCopyright, our customer's name was Marge, and she was the copyright reprint and permissions manager at a big publishing house. Of course, Marge was completely fictitious, but she was our user persona through which we developed our entire product for before we took it out to the real Marges of the world in the publishing. And we knew everything about Marge. We knew how long she had worked for the publishing company. We knew what her day was like. We knew how many faxes she got, how many permissions she granted. And we built iCopyright for Marge. And every time we would go to a meeting, it wasn't an impersonal data. We'd say, well, what would Marge do? What is Marge going to think about that? How is that going to make Marge's job easier? And I'm telling you, it's a great technique. So create an ideal customer, man, woman, company, whatever it is. Name that user and create a complete persona write-up on that customer. And if you want to learn about user personas, here on the page that I'm showing you, there is a link to some more information on how to create a user persona right down here. I know it's hard to see, but there's some good tips. So SurveyMonkey, some of you guys asked about that. That's great for surveying your friends, your family, people on Facebook that you know, people on LinkedIn who will respond to a questionnaire. And again, be careful about the kind of how you structure the questions, as Kirk said. But if you want a very large sample, so I encourage you to look at the video here from Dan. He's an expert at it. He built a product called Photo Bucket, which was bought by Google for about $30 million. And he started it from scratch in his basement. But he really understood his customer. And I've used Mechanical Turk for Leaves.com, my current company, and I was able to survey 2,000 people for $40. And so the way Mechanical Turk works, you go there, you set up an account, and you give people a task. And of course, the task is answer these 3 questions. Don't do 200, don't do 50 because they won't do it, or they'll just put in a bunch of crap data. But try to explain the demographic that you're looking for and ask them 3-4 key questions, and you will literally get very thorough answers for pennies. That's the way Mechanical Turk works. It's just a genius tool. And the last one I'll bring to your attention before we just open up for general questions is Crunchbase. If you have not used that, it's a great source of research on your competitors. Even startup companies you've never heard of have profiles in Crunchbase. So go there, do searches, do keyword searches, and figure out who these companies are, because there's probably 3, 4, 5 other people like you in their basements or just getting started that are working on something similar in the space. And the sooner you can find out who they are, visit their website, look at their materials, download their app from the App Store, the better you're going to be at figuring out what your competitive advantage is going to be. So look over that information there on the site. There's a bunch of best practices, what you should do. There's a lot of links. These are all linkable resources for you guys to do your research over the next week or so. And with that, Sushi couldn't go. He was going to give his little presentation, but he's having very bad connection issues tonight, so he asked to pass. I did not skip him on purpose. So we do have room for I'm going to open it up, first of all, to the floor for more questions. But if somebody wants to pitch their company, we have time for that. Go ahead and ping me, and I'll give you the floor. But I'm going to unmute everybody. And let me know if you have any questions. Go ahead and put yourself on video.